Thanks for joining us at KSWU News. Here tonight is my special guest, Karen Barron. She is a lecturer for the Washburn English Department at Washburn University. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Okay, so the English department holds lectures every once in a while. So will you tell us a little bit about how that got started?
Sure. We have a lecture at least once a year and oftentimes each semester. And the English department is divided into literature and writing and education. And so we try to have speakers come, from one of those different areas, and we take turns. In the writing emphasis particularly, we have nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. So we'll bring poets and writers in. And so this time, coming up will be a nonfiction writer.
Okay. So what is the topic for this lecture?
Okay, the topic is called, the title of it is Monsters and Explorers, Some Notes on True Stories. And so it will be mainly on the topic of point of view, I guess you could say. I can read a little blurb of what Aaron Raslink, who is the speaker, is going to talk about. He writes, "What do you do when you are both the investigator and the object of study, the one who looks and the thing that is looked at?" This was the question Aaron Raslink had to answer as a science historian and a professional performer when writing a memoir about transitioning from female to male. Now as a writer and teacher of nonfiction writing, he explains his own transformation. Simply raised the question every writer and every teacher has to answer: how do we deal with different points of view? With such different perspectives on everything from what a person really is to what really happened in a shooting, say, in Missouri, how writers with a responsibility tell the truth what happened. So this is the productive struggle of all students and teachers and artists who find ourselves within a minority perspective.
Okay. And when is this lecture going to happen and where?
It's exactly a week from today on campus in the Bradbury building. It will be in the Garvey Fink Convocation Hall at 4 o'clock. And the public is invited. We are focusing on our Washburn students, and of particular interest will be those who are writers, but it is open to the public and everyone is welcome, and we hope to see a good crowd.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the author, Aaron Raslink?
Yes. And in fact, I have a little bio about him, but he is a nonfiction writer, as I mentioned, and he's also a teacher at Northwest Pacific. He's also a historian of science and a graduate of clown school. And the book that we will have for sale at the Clemmer Lecture, and the book that is his memoir describing his transformation from female to male, is What Becomes You. And this will be, as I said, for sale at the lecture. But he will be speaking. He made this transformation from female to male 20 years ago when he was 29 years old, and now he's a middle-aged man. So that's not the centerpiece of his discussion.
Right,
but
it's point of view, correct?
Right, it's point of view, yes. And actually, he's working on a new manuscript, which you'll probably read a little bit from, which is about negotiating difference and how immigrants invented American comedy. So it should be a really interesting talk and provocative, raise a lot of issues and questions about point of view and about gender and about ourselves.
Okay. So why did the English department choose this topic for the lecture?
Well, we always try to look and find people from different areas. And as I said, we were trying to think about bringing in someone from creative nonfiction because we had, I don't know if you remember, but we had celebrated William Stafford and his 100-year birthday in March, and so that was largely about poetry. So this time we wanted to go with creative nonfiction, and I had been at a conference in March, as were several of the other colleagues in the English department, and heard Aaron Raslink speak. He was on a panel, and it was just riveting what he had to say, and it was, the topic there was called the monster body, and it was just very interesting, provocative, and I asked him right there if he would consider ever coming to Washburn, and so he agreed to do it.
Wow, so you're really the one who brought him in.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, that's wonderful. Well, for those of you that are just joining in, I'm here with Karen Barron. She's a lecturer for the Washburn English Department at Washburn University. And right now we're talking about how the English department is holding a lecture with special guest Aaron Raz Link, who is the author of What Becomes You. Now, what is this book about?
Well, this book is actually, it was written 6 years ago, and even then his transformation had occurred 10 years before that. It took him about 10 years to write this book. And so it is a memoir. It is about his transformation from female to male. But what's especially interesting, I think, about this book is that his mother also writes in it. She has about 100 pages at the end because it was a transformation for her as well, having birthed a daughter and then now having a son. And the other interesting aspect to that, if that wasn't interesting enough, is that she's a feminist writer and a teacher herself. And so it's just a complex situation that they both wrote about with great honesty, and it's just a really interesting thing to read. And I think to think about, you know, as I said, about gender and about our own ideas about it and our own ideas about who we really are.
Right, so it gives her point of view in the book as well, so that also brings more to your lecture as well.
Exactly, yes.
Perfect.
Another point of view.
Okay, so what kinds of things do you think he'll talk about during the lecture?
Well, I think he'll talk about the larger issues of writing, not necessarily about his experience with this book, although I think he will probably field questions if people have questions about that. But he will be looking at point of view. He'll be looking at writing memoir, writing nonfiction, using creative elements to tell factual stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And how do you think this is going to benefit Washburn students?
I think anytime you can bring a writer in to talk about their experience of writing, it's helpful. It's interesting to actually hear somebody read a little bit from their work and actually hear their physical voice put to the words on the page. And it's also really interesting to hear their perspective that you won't get if you're just reading the book. And then especially useful, I think, is the question and answer period, because then students can ask particularly what's of interest to them, and I think that's especially enjoyable also for the author. I think as writers, we just kind of connect that way. We're used to using the instrument of words, and we just have sort of a bond like that, and so it's beneficial and really enjoyable to get together and talk about the craft.
Okay. And what do you think future lectures that the English department will host, what do you think those topics will include?
Oh, well, it could be anything. We usually get together and discuss ideas. I think probably since we did poetry in spring and this is nonfiction, it may be time for a literary person. I know Sir Christopher Ricks came and talked a year or so ago. We had Ted Kuser, who was a poet, that came and talked, the William Stafford. So we try to bring in a variety of people from a variety of different genres, different areas, and all of it, I think, is useful to students.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. As you've heard, the lecture will take place next Wednesday at 4 p.m. at the Bradbury Thompson Center for any of those interested in going. Coming up, we'll talk about some more royals right after this.